Before we get started with the questions, I want to just have each of the panelists first introduce yourself, your name, where you work, and what your role is there. Dannette?
Dannette Hanson. I'm a Vice President of Talent Acquisition for Nielsen. Nielsen is an audience measurement and data analytics firm. We employ just over 14,000 employees in over 57 countries.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Philomena Satre, and I lead our is that me? Pete? SOS Pete? I lead our diversity, equity, and inclusion work at Land O'Lakes, and I've been there 5 years. Prior to that, I had worked at Wells Fargo for 29 years in all sorts of different HR roles. And just in case you're in the Twin Cities, I also co-lead the Twin Cities Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Roundtable. So it's a collection of, yay, thank you, collection of DEI leaders, over 570 in the Twin Cities.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mahogany Ellis-Crutchfield. For the past decade, I've been working with Cargill in a variety of strategy roles and have now had the opportunity to take that background, and I work for our DEI division as a projects lead. Cargill is a local hometown company. We are the largest private business here in the United States. We are an agricultural firm, we are a supply chain firm, and I think the statistic is 80% of the food in your grocery cart, we have touched it. So if you don't know about Cargill, I would suggest you look it up because we are, I would say, one of the least known but largest local companies.
So cool. I had no idea. Hi, everybody. I'm Rebecca Taylor. I'm the co-founder and chief customer officer at SkillCycle. We're a people operations platform that provides, learning and development at all levels of your employee life cycle. So we really lead with data analysis, assessments, and then really guide people through a coaching process, and then provide sort of that personalized growth and development to help people achieve everything in their careers, with a really big focus on accessing folks that have not historically had that level of one-to-one individual support at any type of company. And so we work with companies of all different sizes, all different industries, and it's really kind of focused on meeting each individual person where they are and helping them get to wherever it is that they want to go.
Good afternoon. My name is Joffrey Wilson. I serve as Vice President of Human Resources and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Mortenson. The company's based here in Minneapolis with presence throughout the United States. We work in 3 different spaces: commercial construction, so think about healthcare or higher education buildings like the one you're in, commercial real estate development, and renewable energy. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to first start off by defining inclusive career growth and leadership advancement. Mahogany, what does that look like? Who are we talking about, and what's the goal?
I love that that's where we're starting. From a company perspective, working in DEI, when I think about inclusive career growth, I think about implementing processes and programs to help enhance our job fit model. I think about the intentional DEI mindset that we put in our HR structure and our processes to help make sure that we are removing barriers for talented individuals who represent the gamut of the dimensions of diversity, so that they have equal access to opportunities within your organization. We never want to leave talent on the table. We never want talent not to think that they have access to career opportunities, and whatever that means for them. And so when I think about inclusive career growth from Cargill's perspective, I think about making sure we're implementing those processes and programs, we are communicating those opportunities out, we are holding ourselves accountable by acknowledging the barriers, and then also putting goals out that we know are achievable and we've got buy-in from leadership.
Philomena, what does that look like at Land O'Lakes?
Yes. And so Mahogany had some really good ideas there. So just to add on to that, at Land O'Lakes, we just had a big leadership conference a week ago, bringing all the 300 leaders together. And one of the messages was around enterprise mindset. So often, if you think about our organizations, it's siloed by businesses. And so you might work in this lane, like in our business, it might be the seed business, the feed business. Mahogany knows what I'm talking about. However, if you think about it, like how do we create mobility within the organization? Because someone may work in finance and be like, I want to work in HR, I want to work in marketing. How do we create those tracks, and how do we create that openness and looking at skill set and competency? And then also looking at, like we have people at our headquarters, in our plants and facilities. How do we create that movement? Employees who work globally, and not forget about the talent that's around the organization. So those, I think, are a few other things that we should be thinking about.
Joffrey, I wanted to ask you, how do organizations get started with this work? Do they have to start from scratch?
I think that you have to assess where you are in order to take a first step. And assessing where you are can mean a couple different things. In terms of our company, one of the things that we did was assess our leaders in terms of where are they in their own DEI journeys. So things like a 360 survey can be helpful, an IDI can be helpful, some type of an assessment in terms of individuals and where they are in their own journeys, but also organizationally. One of the key steps we took a couple years ago was hiring an external consultant to look at our systems and processes and determine where are we versus what best-in-class processes look like. You can pay someone to do that. You can also do it on your own. One of the resources that we looked a lot at is the Global Diversity and Inclusion Benchmarking. It's a self-assessment you can take in terms of what are the best-in-class processes and where do we stand versus that. So, to put a bow on it, essentially assessing where are your folks in terms of what they're doing individually, but also where's the organization.
Rebecca.
I mean, this is an area that we see a lot, especially because what we do at Skill Cycle is we run a lot of these assessments. We work with companies to help them actually create their own customized version. So if you have a specific thing that you're looking to measure, or if you have an understanding of where you want to go, it's really about kind of finding the right data that tells the story that you need to understand how to progress that forward. And I think it's really important to kind of think about it in terms of each individual, but also kind of know that you can identify themes and patterns and trends. And then I think one of the things that we get from a lot of our clients that we work with is they ask, okay, we know all of this stuff now, we have all this information, how do we prioritize what to do about it? Because, when employees do share feedback and they don't see something for it afterwards, then it kind of causes this sort of breakdown in trust for them to kind of want to give more feedback as they go. And so coming from sort of this informed place to say, here's the realistic view of where we are, from engagement to performance to development opportunities and everything in that gambit, it's then sort of saying, where else do we want people to go and how do we help them get there?
So we rehearsed before this what signal to give you, so this is my signal. I just thought of something that I think is also important. In addition to assessment, there are tools that can be used to determine how do you pay people, how do you advance people and promote people. I advocate for hiring a third party to look at your data and determine whether your systems are working to retain and advance talent. So anyhow, that's one thing I want to add.
I would agree. And one of the things that any organization might want to start is at the data level. What does your data look like? Because when you go and engage these external companies, which I'm also a fan of bringing the outside in, because sometimes it's hard to evaluate that internally. Also, sometimes the message, you get a little bit of spoonful of sugar when an external consultant is saying it versus you giving that message, right? But that data, what data do you have access to? Where are the gaps in your data? Is your data telling you the right story? I always like to say, when people have a DEI problem, they immediately go to talent acquisition and they're like, hire me more diverse individuals, right? But my question is immediately, okay, but what are our retention rates? What are your promotion rates? What are we doing along the entire pipeline? And we need data to make those educated decisions. Data will tell you where your growth opportunities are. Data will tell you where to put more money and invest in resources. Data can get you where you need to go in DEI.
I want to now just go down the row basically and have each of you talk about the specific programs at each of your organizations that you are engaged in around this work. And I want you to talk about how you know that they are effective, how you know that they're successful. Dannette, what's happening at Nielsen?
So a couple of things on the Nielsen front. We have programs that are really kind of designed with leaders and individual contributors in mind, but there's sort of two arms of it. So there's one that is really kind of owned and facilitated by our DE&I organization. And then there's the other side of it, which is more led by the learning and development side of the house. There's different programs. We have up to 6 currently that we're operating. And they are structured in ways that sort of meet employees where they are. So there are different cadences. There are some programs that could be 12 weeks in length. There are other programs that could be up to a year. And what we're trying to do is we're really trying to assess helping employees along their employee journey. So you think about what's important to me, what am I looking for, and what do I need from the organization? What's common across most of these programs is that we're creating opportunities for employees to engage with colleagues who they wouldn't otherwise be working alongside. So there's a great networking opportunity. It also gives them a chance to sort of, if you will, pitch themselves in front of other leaders that they wouldn't otherwise have access to. There's typically a mentoring component associated with it. There are skill assessments. So we've talked a lot about just thinking about not just the importance of attracting the right talent into an organization, but how do you retain them once they're there? So helping employees to really navigate their career is essential, and oftentimes they will look to an HR organization or programs like the ones that Nielsen has deployed to help them kind of navigate their employee journey. So we go through things like skills assessments, we talk about individual development plans, we create pathways that allow for these employees to gain access to within the cohorts of the programs that they might be nominated for or opt in to take advantage of. So it creates sort of a community, if you will, of like-minded people that fosters kind of that environment of kind of thinking outside of the box and doing something that would be non-traditional from the core of probably the job that they're in. What we focus a lot on is KPIs. So we've talked a lot about sort of like how to recognize what the gaps are, how to seek out help, whether you solve for this internally or you have the funds to be able to engage an outside consultant. I would really emphasize how important thinking about your KPIs are for any solution that you're considering. It's not just about recognizing that you have a problem and figuring out a solution to address that, but how are you going to measure that along the way and what's most important? So is it about retention? Is it about elevation of underrepresented employees within the organization that may tend to leave the organization at a faster pace than other populations? So think a lot about the KPIs, learn from other experiences. Just for me today, I know that I'll take away some really great things that I can bring back to my organization. So I think it's really beneficial for all of us to kind of think about the different ways in which you're constructing some of those programs.
Yeah, so I'm going to highlight a grassroots program versus a corporate program. So we have 11 employee resource groups at Land O'Lakes. And it started with our Asian Affinity Employee Resource Group that felt like it was really, they do a lot of professional development, all our employee resource groups do, but how could we have a program that would develop leaders, because we have a growing leaders program that's at a higher level, how to prepare leaders for that opportunity. So they started last year. Very successful program. This year asked our LOL Amigos and our African Ancestry Employee Resource Group to join in. So we asked, so kind of one of the challenges is how do we identify people for these leadership development programs so it's not always the same people getting tapped on the shoulder, right? And so worked with our HR operations area to identify our high potential talent by demographic, work with HR and the hiring managers to nominate people to be in the program. So it's a 6-month program. And the really cool part is we had kind of a partnership between DEI, HR, our employee resource groups on the design. And then we have leadership come in and do different segments for them. There's a professional development component. There's also a mentoring component. So each person, leader in the program, has a mentor. And that's powerful because that, as you know, goes both ways between the employee and the leader who's working with them, that learning more about that lived experience. There's a community component of it as well. And so we're in year 2, so measurement-wise, we're looking at retention. We're looking at how many people from the first program have been promoted, what employees are saying as far as overall effectiveness. but I think as powerfully is those leaders who are coming in and sharing what they do in their work and what their business does. Through the conversation, these employees are getting higher level access to leadership, and leadership is better understanding, what are some of those barriers? What are some of those things that get in the way? Because we can look at the data, but a lot of times when leaders hear the voice of employees and some of the challenges that they face, the barriers that they face depending upon where they work, that really makes a difference.
Very similar to what Land O'Lakes is doing, I think Cargill also recognizes that we've got things set at the top of the house, right? But what are we doing for that frozen middle, as we like to call them, or even early career leaders? And how do we make sure that there are no barriers for them to be identified? So we have a couple of different things that we are doing. One of the things that I actually really love, and it happened in HR before I got there, is we revamped our HR system to allow employees to create kind of like a LinkedIn profile internally. This is browsable by certain leaders, HR talent. It has your previous work experience on there. You also put in things like where you'd like to go. I'm trying to remember when I did mine. In the next year and a half, in the next 5 years. They have you name out what type of job titles are you looking for. They also have you type in skills that you have. Project management, strategy, production. So they are creating this kind of data field that we can tap into and say, hey, these employees said, in 2 years, I want to be, a junior such and such. And we have openings for juniors such and such. I think that accessibility and clear communication to your talent populations, that they can take control of their rise at your organization, is really important. I think there's a lot of mystery and kind of like this black box around who gets chosen to move up. And we want to empower our employees to say, you can take part in that. So we've really begun to create opportunities for people to participate in their own career growth in that way. So that's a structured process. I would say we are also doing mini programs where we're job shadowing. We have opportunities from 6 months to 2 years, whether it's office to production, production to office, whether it's supply chain to marketing, whether it's United States to a global opportunity and someone elsewhere in the world coming to the United States. We are creating those job shadow opportunities for people to say, I want to skill up. I want these opportunities. I'm going to raise my hand for these programs. And I'm sure Cargill is not the only business that will have surprise projects or things where we need talent now, right? And we want to tap into these individuals. We are also working with our BRGs and saying, these are people who outside of their day-to-day job care about our culture. They care about Cargill's values around creating inclusive teams and inclusive leadership. These are individuals we want to tap for opportunities. So I would say some of the things that I'm most proud of are the ways in which we are enabling individuals to put themselves in some of those pipelines, to raise their hands and say, hey, you can look at me too. I also want to elevate my career. If you haven't heard it from my manager, look at me, right? Because I would like to participate. So those are some of the things I'd like to highlight.
Rebecca, I'm going to come back to you in just a second.
Yeah.
Joffrey, what's happening at Mortensen?
Yeah, I'll highlight two things. One is there'd be team members that we wanted to retain that we lost. And when I'd have conversations with folks, there'd be a consistent theme that the organization saw that person in a certain light and that person didn't know it. They didn't know what the expectations were in terms of where we saw them going, and stepped outside of the organization to look at what are some of the best practices that companies employ to retain and advance diverse talent. And what we ended up doing is trying to intentionally intersect our talent processes and discussions with diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think it's really important to leverage existing platforms versus always creating something new, particularly in the current environment where folks just feel a sense of overwhelm given what's been going on the last couple of years. So the program that we put into place, it leverages what we call a talent summit, where we talk about all of the talent in the organization, and we identify high-performing, high-potential, diverse talent. And then we make sure if they're in readiness in terms of getting promoted within the next couple of years, we want to be very intentional about what their development plan is. We can communicate to them, no promises in terms of where they're going, but communicate where we see them going and how we potentially can get there. I can tell you that in development plans in a lot of organizations, if a manager isn't good at developing plans, you'll see more time and role in terms of what their development plan is. That's not really something that's actionable or measurable other than they've been here for a year or 2 years. So we've been very intentional in terms of what are development plans, and they're customized. So it may include internal Mortensen leadership development opportunities. It may be external opportunities. It could be a coach. It could be a sponsor. We're very intentional about customized plans for key diverse talent. There's a second part of your question, though, in terms of measurement and how do you know it's working? And I'd say that we are very transparent in terms of what we're achieving or not achieving as it pertains to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So on our internal website, Mortnet is what it's called, team members can actually access metrics for all 4 of our key focus areas. So one of those being their goals for revenue, their goals for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and our metrics that we post. So you can see our workforce composition, hiring and turnover, customer experience, and safety. So those 4 things we're very transparent about. The last thing I'll share with this is anything that's important to a company, there should be goals associated with it. There should be a mechanism for tracking. So I'm spending a lot of time on accountability and transparency across all of our leadership groups.
I'm curious, as you're doing this work and identifying new leadership, have any of your organizations sort of revamped or revised the criteria and requirements for advancement? So taking into account people's backgrounds, their lived experiences, rather than kind of more traditional things like a master's degree, so that the process is more equitable. Have any of you guys been seeing that at your organizations? Philomena?
Yeah, we have.
Can you just talk about what that looks like?
So back in the day, we recruited from specific schools that were ag-based. University of Minnesota, Iowa State, KU, right? So certain universities, we've opened up where we recruit, how we recruit, and also looking at our job descriptions. So reevaluating competency hiring versus skill, versus qualifications. Does this position have to have a college degree, a master's, a PhD? Because I think that's the piece. A lot of times we just do what we've always done, and then we're like, why aren't we getting more diverse applicants? Or how could we open that up? And really expanding our pool, working with the organization called Manners, Minority and Ag and Natural Resources, working with HBCU, like all different recruitment resources too, but really being intentional about what does that skill set look like. I think that's important.
So I would say we are beginning our process around apprenticeship at Cargill. And we are also working on skills-based hiring, competency-based hiring. Cargill went through a process a number of years ago. All of our roles have a competency equivalent. So if there is a bachelor's degree or a master's or some type of certificate required, there is a year equivalence of work experience for every single role. Now there's a culture change, right? You've got to have that culture change piece with it. Just because you remove that requirement, you've got to get your managers to see that. But we are starting with our early career individuals, bringing them in and raising them up. And as we began this journey of apprenticeship, we have just been overwhelmed with the amount of managers and internal talent that want to help upskill their current talent population that maybe don't have the skills to do something different, but they know that they can, right? And so we are consistently, and it's my day job right now is trying to figure out how to help so many individuals across Cargill figure out where their talent lies and how to get them that help, no matter what their background is, no matter what their training was. If they have an interest and a passion and an ability to learn, how do we help foster that? We have an accountability to our employees and to future talent to help grow them up. I was in a talent, and then I'll let you talk, Joffrey. I was in a meeting, and I stayed a little silent, and I was a little upset. They wanted a certain dimension and diversity in a certain type of role, and they said that type of role, we just didn't have that dimension of diversity. And the managers were complaining that, we could go and we could try and recruit, but there's not enough of that, person out there in the world to fill this role. So, we should just get a pass. And I got upset because I was like, well, what are you doing to help build up individuals for Cargill for this role? If you're looking for more women in a certain role in finance, what is Cargill doing to help build women in finance? And what are we doing for our community, for our employees who might take a turn at Land O'Lakes before jumping back over to Cargill? What are we doing to create that marketplace? We can't just expect there always to be that talent pool, and we can't just always hire one type of talent. We have to take responsibility and accountability for creating, developing, upskilling that talent.
I'd say the thing that I'd add, I love what has been shared so far on this topic. I'd say one of the things that we struggle with is in the STEM space, women, people of color are not encouraged to pursue STEM paths from very early ages. And as a result, we don't have enough talent coming our way today. So we've actually taken measures to engage youth a lot earlier. So two of the programs I'd speak to, one is ACE Mentoring, stands for Architecture, Construction, and Engineering. It's a high school program where we can actually mentor students. And the vast majority of students that participate in ACE from early years, they actually do go on a 2-year and 4-year, go into 2-year and 4-year programs, focus on architecture, construction, or engineering. That has helped create a pipeline to construction and potentially to Mortenson. The other thing that I would speak to is we want to remove barriers to getting into our industry and potentially into our company. So one of the things we're really excited about, we partnered with Wallen Education Partners based here in the Twin Cities and Dunwoody, and create a scholarship where students can go to school for free, we'll pay for it, and they can work at Mortenson for 2 years while they're going to school. So full-time during the summer, part-time during the school year, but we're removing barriers in terms of the cost to get an education, removing the barrier in terms of getting some work experience so that at the end of those 2 years, we'll have folks that are ready to start and hopefully want to join us.
And that's called the earn and learn model. And that is a really great model. And we use it too, the earn and learn. So they get an education, a certificate, or a degree while getting full-time benefits, and then can immediately be ready to engage in your corporation.
Rebecca, you have kind of a 10,000-foot view because you work with a lot of organizations and a lot of leaders. What are you seeing that's successful here?
Yeah, so a lot of what we see, and before co-founding Skill Cycle, I spent 10 years in HR. I worked at large companies, small startups, sort of all over the place. And the thing that's been really important is sort of establishing what those behaviors are expected that often go unsaid, that can breed sort of bias in the workplace when someone is being dubbed as high potential or not high potential. And it's being very clear about, you know, for people at this level or in this role, these are the behaviors that we expect. These are the competencies for these roles. And really making it clear and communicative so that someone could always see themselves in that role because they understand those behaviors and they can live those behaviors or find a way to embrace them if it's a skill that you have to learn or wherever that sort of gap is. And it's been a lot harder for companies who've been adjusting to a hybrid work model or a remote work model because all of the norms that we knew before have changed. And so it's about being very, very prescriptive and intentional, especially from the leadership side, to say, this is what we expect, this is what we look for, and if we're not looking for the right thing, then we need to talk about that. And it's about always being open to revisiting and revising how you identify high potential in your organization to make sure that you are being inclusive across every single gambit, whether it's from a degree perspective or it's from the way that you communicate. You know, it's about kind of understanding where the flexibility could be so that you can really see like where are we boxing ourselves in and where are we really opening up doors.
I want to talk about the challenges to this work. It's obviously super important, but it's not easy. What have you all seen in terms of the stumbling blocks? What do people just not get right? Dannette? Yeah.
I was just thinking about something that's so important to all of this work that companies are investing in is don't forget to think about the importance of a candidate's perception of your organization through their own interview experience. Many times I've seen sort of that mandate coming down from leadership wanting to solve for, we need female representation in the technology space. TA, help us to get there, right? We need more female engineers, hire as many females as we can. The feedback that we've gotten on the talent acquisition side is that when we do make really conscious efforts to go after talent in a very specific area, whether it be female representation or just different elements of diversity, is that candidates, if they don't see representation of themselves in the interview experience, oftentimes would peg that organization as somewhere that they wouldn't belong, somewhere that they wouldn't fit in. This happened a lot in my last organization where we were looking to increase our female representation in the engineering space. And so time and time again, our recruiters would do the great work of going after female engineers, getting them excited to come and interview, but what we discovered through the feedback that they offered was every person that I met was a white male in their 50s. And that's not really a team that I want to be part of. So think about kind of how you would be reflected to a candidate who's looking at your organization. Talent is about two elements. It's about the attraction of getting people to join the organization just as much as it's about retention. So you can really do yourself a disservice if you're not really cognizant of making sure that you're creating some of those pathways internally that would demonstrate that you have an organization that really supports movement throughout different disciplines of work, helping underrepresented talent move into roles that they wouldn't have had the opportunity to experience otherwise. So I would say think a lot about that, sort of how candidates are going to perceive you through that interview experience. We learned a lot just by asking candidates who we didn't offer a job to, just as much as the people that were really excited to accept that job offer. And we wanted to be really thoughtful about asking, tell us about the interview experience, because we were doing a lot of transformation in my last organization of trying to really get that right in such a critical space where we were doing a lot of talent growth. And so we were very intentional about surveying every candidate that went through the interview experience and trying to understand what we could do to make it a more attractive place to come to. So, think about that in the element of how you engage your talent acquisition team. There's another part that really stands out to me, and I've been talking to our DE&I colleagues recently about this, is find ways to make sure that your recruiting organization has awareness and accessibility into those talent pipelines. So when you talk to your leaders about rising talent or talent that you really are looking to retain within the organization, the folks within your company that probably know the most about what a manager is looking for and where they're willing to flex, that will be your recruiters. They understand what managers are willing to flex on. They tend to be, really great recruiters tend to be very influential with leaders. So if they have an understanding of, some of the talent that you're investing in and some of the programs that we've given examples of, they can help those individuals to navigate. This might be a really great fit for you and you wouldn't have thought about it because you're sitting in operations and it's a marketing role, but here's where the transferable skills lie. So we're trying to find ways to kind of bridge sort of a partnership between recruitment, DE&I, to kind of find ways to make sure that we understand who that talent is that we're so thoughtfully trying to retain, but that we're also educating our employees along the way as they go through an internal posting process. They don't know how to market themselves for a role that they don't feel qualified for. So find ways to really engage with your recruitment team. I think you could learn some really great practices from those individuals.
I love that. I was a former recruiter too. It's like talent acquisition is always such a good partner in that sort of space. What we've seen from a lot of where companies sort of fall short is not having the right change management plan for whatever program it is that you build to really have the right champions rallied, the right resources, and the right reinforcement to make sure that everything that you pour your blood, sweat, and tears into, and that you're really creating a sort of the right plan for how you're going to bring all these different programs to life. It's that change management plan that will be the thing that will make or break any of it.
Just to add one thing, and Joffrey alluded to this a little bit earlier too, is just how do you build the cultural competency of the talent acquisition team that can open or close the door right away, and the people who are doing the hiring. So we've done a lot of work around that, and I do love the IDI, Intercultural Development Inventory, to help with that. We've had a lot of different trainings on different segments of diversity, and language is important. I was just at a conference focused on women, and one of the speakers used the word guys throughout, and the whole chat line blew up, right? So thinking about language, who are we talking with, what's the language we're using, people first with disabilities, like all those different things, because if not, you're interviewing a candidate, they're like, they don't understand me, this isn't gonna be a good fit for me. So I think, how do we build that muscle for all of the people who touch our candidates?
Mahogany, did you want to add something?
Yeah, so I think the original question is, what do we sometimes get wrong in DEI, right? What I wanted to add was two things. One, and this is something Cargill has been really intentional about this year that we're really excited, is making sure that our entire organization knows that DEI is not siloed in HR, and it is not the 6 individuals in the DEI organization. Cargill has 150,000 employees across the globe. The 6 of us cannot affect change for DEI. It must be all of us, right? And it is not just DEI. It is our supplier diversity. It is where Treasury is holding money in different banks. It is where our foundation is doing foundational giving. It is where what schools we're going to for recruitment. It is lots of different things around. Where are we always volunteering? When we're going to volunteer, what organizations and what populations is that helping? There are many different ways that everyone in the business can help create inclusion and can be equitable across your organization, no matter what you do, no matter what your business does. Are the truck drivers that you guys are, we do grain and feed transportation, are the truck drivers, Hispanic owned or women owned, how do you do that across the organization? And how do you drive accountability across the organization for driving those metrics? Too often is it put on HR to drive those accountabilities. It's the business. HR is a function enabling the business. We need to enable them to be the DEI doers in our organization. So that would be the first one. And the second one is something that I see that corporations get wrong, is enacting goals and metrics before you're getting buy-in from your leaders. If you go out and just say, we're gonna have 50%, minority diversity or gender diversity or, LGBTQ or veteran, that's a problem, right? We need to talk and bring our leaders along on the journey, and not just the C-suite. You've gotta bring in some of the levels below that and talk about, where can we affect change? Do you have the buy-in, right? Are these the right leaders to help you guys make these changes? Cargill likes to say we're a huge safety culture, and just as important as safety is diversity, right? So you need to be hitting your business goals, your safety goals, your diversity goals, and how do we right size them for you and the work that you guys are able to do?
I'm curious. As we do this work, leadership is going to start to look different. It's going to start to sound different. And I would imagine that might be an isolating experience for the people who are in these roles. And so I wanted to ask you, how do we ensure that employees from diverse backgrounds are supported as they move up a ladder? How do we ensure that there's a community of allies within the organization who are there to support their work? Joffrey, can we start with you?
I would share 2 things. One was alluded to before. The language in companies may be affinity groups. It could be business resource groups, employee resource groups. There's tons of different terminology, but creating a space of safety and a sense of community, I think, is really important in this work. I think that also, in addition to what you're doing within your company, finding opportunities to develop and create community outside of a company is important as well. So as an example, McKinsey, they have different development programs over the course of 6 months. A program like ELC, they have a program that is mid-level managers over the course of like 2 or 3 days, but to see people that have a similar experience, a shared experience, and creating those connections, I think, is important, both inside of your company, but also outside of it. But there's a litany of programs for different underrepresented groups where connections can be made.
Just to add to that, the thing that I was thinking about, Jeffrey, as you were talking about that, we are trying to be really intentional about when people get placed in a community maybe that is unfamiliar, or like a person of color in a small town, rural community where they may be the only on the team and the only in the community. How do we build support around that person, around that leader, from maybe employees who've had a similar lived experience, or can be a mentor or a guide to say, hey, when this happened, or I'm here to support, I'm just one phone call, one email away, being really thoughtful about that. Because for many, that can be a challenging experience, and we want to keep our talent.
It's obviously there's a bit of a tricky political climate also in this country. We're just talking about some of these ideas is, not welcome. I'm curious if any of you have experienced or seen pushback on any of this work. Philomena, do you want to talk about that?
Oh, yes. Well, and I notice it the most when I go to conferences in agriculture. And people are super excited to see me because I work for Land O'Lakes. I'll have Land O'Lakes, not my job. And so they'll be like, oh my gosh, you work for Land O'Lakes. What area do you work in? I'm like, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they're like, oh. And I'm like, oh, well, what does that mean? Let's talk more about that, right? And so it's like, how do I engage in conversation? Or we just had a big agriculture conference for DEI leaders in Atlanta. And it was industry, secondary ed, nonprofits. Many of the people who are DEI leaders in secondary ed are worried about funding. They're worried that their state will no longer fund their DEI role, their curriculum. And so it's like way beyond even just our organization. But what we were talking about at this conference is how can we as a collective in this industry be a voice of and support these organizations with our legislators, working with our government relation teams, and just being aware of that.
I'll just add, I think it's imperative to understand your collective why. Why are you doing this? Because if not, there's a million rabbit holes that'll emerge. It'll become DEI's charity. The differences that you have are not considered an asset. There's a lot of different things that'll emerge. But if you understand your collective why, I think we have the ability to fight the pushback that you're talking about.
It's unfortunate that sometimes you have to pull out the business case of DEI. You've got to go back to the statistics of why diverse teams are important and why you should have diversity of thought, and not just that, but diversity in your organization. I think it's important as DEI professionals and our, world, we have so much turnover because you come in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, we're going to change the world, and then the system spits you out. But I would say you've got to have in your back pocket lots of different tools to help convince those people who might be tired of hearing about DEI, right? We've got to have different tools and different levers to encourage them to do what I would say is the right thing, right? And that language piece, because so many things have become politicized, unfortunately, or the definitions of certain things have been misunderstood. We need to use proper language, unfortunately. We've got to have the business cases provided. We've got to be able to talk about return of investment for whatever program we are doing. And if you have all of those things, if you're bulletproof, so to speak, on your why, I think that can help with some of the pushback. And then getting your senior leader sponsors behind you. You've got to know who in your organization you can lean on. You've got to find out who your champions are. I've had a few situations where I've come in, I'm DEI, you guys got to make a change. They said no. I went and I talked to some other people, and a couple of months later, that organization did make changes, right? Because they had the right leader come in and say, we're gonna do this. So make sure you know who your champions are, and care more about the work getting done than who's getting credit for that work getting done.
We are about to run out of time, but I just want to ask one final question. Dannette, I'm wondering if I could ask you this one. Given all of this, how do you keep up enthusiasm and engagement for these programs? How would you counsel people moving forward?
I would say, on the topic of failure, don't be afraid to fail, right? I think some of the best organizations are just trying their best to assess what's going to work within sort of the confine of their organization. You might not get it right. But your employees are vocal. They will tell you, right? So don't be afraid to ask for feedback. I think about something that my last organization tried to do, which was really, a very sensitive topic living here in the Twin Cities around the George Floyd event that took place here, was they hosted several just discussions, and it was facilitated by members of our DE&I organization, and it created a forum for employees to talk about just how they were feeling, how they were processing that very troubling event. There were just as many employees who I would say really valued taking part in those conversations, being able to dial in, express how they were feeling, talk about some of the emotions associated with it. And we had just as many employees who didn't feel that that was very valued or that they needed to have that kind of conversation in the workplace. So I think the one thing that I would probably leave all of you with is do not be afraid to fail. Try different things. Otherwise, my fear is that your DE&I program becomes very static and it becomes almost the representation of a corporate function, and that's really not what you're looking to achieve.
Wonderful. I think we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much to all of you. We have Dannette Hanson from Nielsen, Philomena Satre from Land O'Lakes, Mahogany Ellis-Crutchfield from Cargill, Rebecca Taylor from Skill Cycle, and Joffrey Wilson from Mortensen. Thank you guys so much.